Assalamu alaikum and good day. I am Jehan M. Bashir and I am going to discuss to you about the novel entitled The Reluctant Fundamentalist. So this novel was written by the famous Mohsin Hamid, who is a British Pakistani novelist, writer, and a brand consultant. So he was born in 1971 in Lahore, Pakistan. He received his early education from Lahore American School and graduated summa cum laude with an AB from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University in 1993. He also attended the Harvard Law School, graduating in 1997. Now, before we delve into the novel, let me first introduce to you the characters who played their roles in the story. So there is actually only one main character in the novel named Changes, who also is the narrator of the novel. The supporting characters are the American stranger whom Changes met unexpectedly and Erica, whom he fell in love with. Now, in writing the novel, the writer or the author made use of the following styles. First, the dramatic monologue. So basically, the novel is from a first-person point of view in the present tense. We can only hear our Pakistani protagonist, and the narrative is told in one voice only, as we never hear the American interlocutor, but we can deduce his reactions from Changes' words. So this is a remarkably unique narrative, forcing the readers to use their conscious and unconscious assumptions related to the protagonist's cultural, ethnic, and religious background. Secondly, the author made use of frame narrative, which takes form of a conversation between the Pakistani protagonist and the unnamed American. And lastly, the author also made use of flashback narrative, which is surfaced in the stories told by the Pakistani protagonist in increments that describe his time in America both before and after the events of the 9/11. So in writing the story, the author also made use of symbolism. So here are the symbols surfaced in the novel. First, we have the beards. So the beard of Changes symbolizes his connection to his homeland and his Pakistani cultural background. So after the 9/11, beards were to many a symbol of radical Islam and thus undesirable. Secondly, we have Changes' relationship with Erica or America. So the difficult relationship between Changes and Erica is in itself a form of allegory for his and much of the Muslim world's relationship with the United States. So when we say allegory, this refers to the situation where the characters and events are symbols that stand for ideas about human life or for a political or historical situation. And lastly is the name Erica. So Erica's name is actually embedded from the term America. So just like how Erica cannot seem to get over her past relationship, the interference here is that America cannot survive if it does not turn its back on an unreal idyllic past and face the future of a diverse modern world. So we are down to the summary or the plot of the story. So the story begins on the street of Lahore. So a Pakistani man named Changes offers to direct an American visitor where he can find a good cup of tea. So it is never made clear who the American stranger is or what he is doing in Lahore that time. Whoever he is, Changes notes that stranger appears to be on a mission. So in an effort to assist the stranger, Changes joins him at his table for tea. Over the course of a long evening of tea, snacks, and a meal, Changes describes his life during the time he lived in America, interspersing this narrative with vignettes of Lahore life. So in the story, we have learned that Changes attended Princeton University on a scholarship, and he studied business worked harder than his American classmates to receive top marks and looked forward to his new life in the elite business world of America. So after finishing university, Changes successfully secured a training contract with a boutique valuation firm known as Underwood Sampson. So with a sign-on bonus from the firm, Changes goes on vacation to Greece with other classmates from Princeton, including a girl named Erica. So Changes and Erica seem to be attracted to each other, but Changes has to settle for Erica's friendship while on the island with the rest of the wealthy university students. As it turns out, Erica was still in grief and mourning for her childhood sweetheart, or her ex-boyfriend, Chris, who died from a lung cancer a year earlier. So when the group returns to New York, Changes begins his job with Underwood Sampson, working feverishly to be the best and the brightest. So his co-workers and teachers note that he displays sound financial and business skills, all of which catapult him to first place among his class of trainees. Meanwhile, he maintains a relationship with Erica, spending time with her parents, friends, and eventually time alone with just her. So Changes is offered a work assignment in Manila when the unthinkable happens, that is, the World Trade Center is attacked on September 11, 2001. So Changes finds himself pleased at the event, not because of the destruction to innocent lives, but because America has been brought to her knees in such a public and spectacular way. Now, flying back to New York, however, Changes immediately sees and feels the changes brought about by the attacks. He is strip-searched at the airport and witnessed the pained looks of his fellow passengers when he boarded the plane. So despite having lived in America for years, he is sent to secondary inspection upon his arrival in New York. So all of these events added to his growing resentment of American capitalism. So with the war on terror being waged between America and terrorist-sponsoring countries, including the Pakistan, Changes becomes uneasy with his life in America. He traveled home to Lahore for a brief visit, and upon returning to America, he found that Erica has been committed to a clinic. Now, while working on a project in Chile for Underwood Sampson, Changes teaches about the Janissaries. So these are young Christian men whose identity was erased when they were forced to be soldiers in a Muslim army and immediately identified with their plight. So thinking more on the subject and his uneasiness in New York, Changes abandoned the project in Chile. Moreover, due to his visa status, once Changes was fired from his job at Underwood Sampson, he was forced to leave America and return to Lahore. But before leaving, Changes attempted to visit Erica again, but is told that she was gone missing. So he visited her apartment where her mother gave him a copy of Erica's unpublished book. Now, as they sit in the cafe, that is Changes and the American stranger, Changes kept noticing that the American stranger is very apprehensive of their surroundings and that he is in possession of a sophisticated satellite phone on which he is repeatedly messaging. And that under the clothing of that American stranger, he saw that there was a bulge which might be a gun. So as the evening draws to a close, Changes offered the American stranger a walk back to his hotel. So while the two were walking, Changes explained that he is a university lecturer and that he mentored a group of politically minded students. So it eventually became clear that a group of men, including the waiter from the cafe, are following the stranger and Changes. Now, eventually, as the novel ends, the stranger reaches to his jacket as he did in the cafe earlier. This time around, Changes mentioned that he might be looking either for a business card or a gun. Now however, it is left to the reader to determine just who the American stranger is and what exactly he is doing in Lahore. Now that ends the plot or the story of the novel. So here are the themes that were surfaced in the story. First, we have racism and fundamentalism. So throughout the novel, the beginning on the first page, Hamid, the author, showed how people judge one another based on their clothing, the skin color, and their mannerisms, which formed and shaped Changes and his impressions of the United States. In the case of fundamentalism, the novel portrayed religious fundamentalism and market fundamentalism. Secondly, we have patriotism. So as a Pakistani man in the United States, Changes has a perspective and experiences that gave him insight about aspects of American patriotism that the Americans take for granted. Reflecting on his time at Princeton University, he realized that there is really a hidden patriotic project in his college education. So young intelligent students from the United States and the rest of the world are taught to love America, live in America after they graduate, and lend their services to American companies. Thirdly, we have the coming of age. So this novel is actually a good example of a coming of age novel where in the in the early chapters, Changes, the protagonist, is an uncertain, passive young man. He traveled all over the world without ever voicing a particularly strong reason to go to these places. So because of his passivity in most of the first half of the book, Changes encountered many different models for how he should come of age. However, in the aftermath of September 11, he began to realize that the idea of growing up he's been fed in Princeton University and Underwood Sampson made him useful to Americans but does not actually make him a part of America. But even if the novel is a book about growing up, it is not completely clear what Changes grew up to be. The ambiguity of the ending may be read as a sign that Changes is still growing and still has many choices to make that will define who he will become. Now, fourth, we have human connection. So in the face of racism and aggressive nationalism, Hamid questions whether it is possible for two unlike people to genuinely trust and respect one another while also exploring humans' fundamental need for these kinds of connections. And fifth, we have American imperialism. Now, through Changes' experiences, the novel paints a picture of enormous financial and military power that the United States wields over the rest of the world. The novel depicts how the United States' power is so great because it is both hard, meaning that it has tremendous military force, and soft, meaning that it encourages foreigners to adopt American customs. And lastly is the nostalgia for better times. So nostalgia in the novel is the longing to live in an often mythical and fictitious past. So that is all for my report. Thank you so much for listening.